Welcome to the Basecamp Community Podcast, hosted by your head coaches, Tim Cusick and me, Namrita Brooke. We discuss timely topics that you can apply to get the most out of your training and learn to perform at your best. I am Namrita Brooke, Basecamp coach and sports nutritionist. I've been coaching for over 15 years. I have a PhD in applied exercise physiology and a master's in sports nutrition, and I'm also a registered dietitian.
And my name is Tim Cusick. I'm the other Basecamp head coach. I've been coaching for over 20 years. I've had the luxury of coaching athletes to numerous world and national titles and to the Olympics.
Welcome back. We are cruising in podcast mode, and today we're going to do something a little bit different, maybe a little less structured than our normal topics, but still a relevant conversation, I think. So, to continue something we were just chatting about, we've been talking about racing. Obviously, we're in that, time of the year, and we've talked about the concept of and the idea of stagnation before and why. Maybe people are doing the work, but they're not getting faster. And it's been kind of a topic of conversation among our coaching team as well, right?
So, it's so funny, and this is why I love working with you, and we partner well on this. It's like we each kind of have an excellent overlap of information, but what you, with your nutrition background and exercise physiology and coaching, and me in my coaching background, we each have unique perception. So I really love when we engage in those dialogues, like, wow, how are we going to figure this out? We have great scenarios. We're blessed to have such a great coaching group. We have 5 new coaches that we're working with. You and I are chatting about, wow, how are we going to solve problems? How do we keep our ongoing training? And when we get into dialogues like that, like for you listeners, the dialogue was, when we get athletes coming in, one of the things we're hearing more and more is they're just stuck. They can't get faster. So Namrita and I got into a good dialogue, healthy debate, like, well, why do athletes not get faster? And then it's funny, she had a little more vision of the nutrition side. I have a little more vision of the training side, but we understand each other pretty well. So the question I asked, which then became the podcast here, Namrita, if you could only choose one thing, like I know there's a list and it can be plenty, but if you, as with all your years of experience and stuff like that, can only choose one thing, what would it be? And then, of course, she asked me back. By the time we finished that 45-minute conversation, we said, oh, we should have recorded it as a
Just
podcast.
hit record.
So here we
Yeah.
are. We're going to
Yeah.
have that
Well,
podcast.
also, it's funny because so we're at this time of the year where we don't just have unlimited time to work on something. So we have coaching interest forums coming in and people are like, well, I have this race in like 8 weeks or, 10 weeks or whatever. And this is my goal. How do I get faster? Without starting from scratch, basically, I'm thinking, all right, what are we looking at in terms of okay, we do this live, so I had to turn off the vacuum cleaner. So what are we looking at from an athlete history standpoint where, we might identify some trends and that's really, more area with the data, but what has the athlete been doing that is limiting them? And then I am thinking of things from, like you said, the nutrition perspective, which you can see in data when you're looking at trends, but also it takes a conversation with the athlete. But I think nutrition is one of those areas where you can see an immediate benefit for somebody. You don't have to wait, 8 weeks to 12 weeks to see adaptations. They're there facilitating adaptations in the moment, in the workout. You can actually do intervals better, whatever those intervals are. You can ride for longer, you can feel better, you recover better, and then you can, carry that into the next day. And as we know, that consistency is what is going to drive those adaptations that eventually yield performance. Um, so yeah, let's, I guess, just kind of recap what we were talking about. So from your perspective, what's the thing? What's the one thing
All
that
right,
you would say you'd pick
cool.
out?
I get to go first. I like it. So I'll go first and then I'll comment on yours. When I look at it from like for me, there are, and I want to caveat to everybody listening, there can be numerous reasons you're stuck. But that being said, I have in 20 plus years observed it usually comes down to like 2 or 3 things, common things. And the one thing that I see that raises to the top is that the athlete in their progression, they do their winter training, they develop a certain capacity, their strong aerobic capacity, strong durability, all the things that you're working on a foundation approach. They get into this performance season and they're not doing correct and enough high intensity training, which we're going to call VO2 max work. So I think VO2 max, it's kind of like we all know it's an indicator of our potential for performance, not the unlimited, not the end all be all, but it's a limit. It is something that helps us understand, what is going to be our cardiovascular performance, what's our capacity in endurance sports and stuff like that. But we don't understand it as well as what we really want, because we want a combination of things. And if we don't understand that combination of things, it can be a barrier. And why am I not getting faster? Key driver. And in my 20 years of experience, not doing the right amount of work in this range and the right time in your training and really committing to the growth here is important. So that's what needs to be focused on. But we also need to understand that VO2 max is a physiological status. That's that's the highest amount of oxygen you can uptake and intake, breathe in and use at the molecular level under high intensity load. That's a physiological status. What we really want, we want more of that, don't get me wrong, is we want power at that VO2 max or max aerobic power. So we have to think about that in two different, highly related, but two different buckets. We need to improve the physiological status of VO2 max, raise it, make it higher, utilize more intake and uptake and intake, utilize more oxygen, and be able to put out a higher amount of power at that VO2 max, because there's not just limited by that cardiovascular event. There's some efficiency factors and other things, neuromuscular factors that are playing in there. When we talk about this type of training that's missing, we tend to call it VO2 max, but I'd rather call it high intensity training. Here's why. Let's break training down into just three simple categories. You have endurance training, or ET, or aerobic training, or AT. And that's stuff that definitively happens below your LT2, and probably much more like if you drew a circle around your LT1, it's work you're doing in the range of your lactate threshold 1. That's endurance or aerobic training. That's a good space. It's all your foundational work. Everything is built on top of that. Now, when you get progressed and you're getting closer to performance season, you need high intensity training. Now, high intensity training is done just over your LT2. And now there's some manipulations for bouncing around, but the average and target is just above your LT2 or your lactate threshold, or your FTP, your numbers. It's just above that. We've coined that area as VO2 max training, but it really is high intensity training as a whole. And then on top of that, you have sprint intensity training, like high intensity training, sprint work, 30-second to a minute kind of efforts. That range. One of the things, whether it's been polarized or commitments to pyramidal training, when this time of season comes along, I see an underutilization of high intensity training, which often can be the barrier of why the athlete's not getting faster. At this time of year, maybe they're leaning deeper into their aerobic work that they were doing, longer duration rides, more tempo, maybe a little more sweet spot. But there's a point where if you want to get faster, you need that high intensity training VO2 max, and you need to do the work in there.
Okay,
Now,
wait.
what's that?
I said, wait, one thing though.
What's
Make
that?
sure you address this, or I have so if somebody's coming in and you're looking at their training, oh, but I'm doing, Zwift races, 3 days a week, or I'm doing group rides Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday. So that's another thing too. So, identifying the intensity, but then also what?
Great point. You have to do it right. So here, everybody, is my opinion of right. There's a lot of people, a lot of smart coaches in the world. You can ask their opinion, but here's mine. One, you need a solid aerobic foundation. You need to do your base and foundation work throughout the winter so that you can do enough work to achieve improvement results in the high intensity training zones to improve your VO2 max. If you don't have a base, it's not going to work. Yeah, you'll get faster for a little bit, but it really won't work like you want it. Two, you need to understand frequency, how much of this high intensity work in a week or in a cycle you can withstand. That answer is two. Actually, it's really anywhere from 1 to 3 days a week, depending on your training status, your age. Two is probably the sweet spot. If maybe you're a little more mature or don't have quite the fitness, one is still a good enough impact. If you're younger and recover well and really fit, three might be your number. And there's some reasons you can overload that work in a certain week, but maybe that's another topic. So a good frequency, a good target is 2 a week, one, maybe three, but two is the sweet spot. Then there's an understanding of the interval sets themselves. I've seen more variations of VO2 max work and what target and what are we doing with this firm. Here's my opinion, the secret to VO2 max. Whatever format you use, you need to target 14 to 15 minutes of time at or near VO2 max. Let's call that 90% and above, maybe even a little higher, but 90% and above at or near VO2 max for a total time accumulation of 14 to 15 minutes. That, in my opinion, is the gold standard of adaptation. You don't need a lot more. We have a fair amount of science showing that more time at VO2 max, at or near VO2 max, actually has a very diminishing return. So you're generating fatigue for only a little bit more. So when you think about what interval sets you're doing, you should target, maybe you need to start at 12 minutes at VO2 max, but your end target is to elevate that. So your workout sets get 14 to 15 minutes time at VO2 max with small or appropriate amount of rests in between your intervals. So let's bring that to life a little bit. Let's say you're going to go out and do a set of 4 x 4 minutes, a very popular workout right now for a series of different reasons, some of them Norwegian reasons. But let's just say 4x4 you're going to go do. You would look with 4 minutes rest in between. You would look at that set of 4x4 and you would say that's 16 minutes at VO2 max. And therefore, if I did 4x4, I'm a minute over, I'm good. But that's not how our physiology works. So when we do those 4x4, assuming they're appropriately targeted, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment, you have a concept. You start your interval, you're going hard, you're targeting 300 watts as your VO2 max interval. Let's just put a number to it right now. The first minute I go 300 watts, I'm not really at VO2 max. We have an element of our VO2 max, which is known as our fast component. It's VO2 kinetics, how quickly we get up to VO2 max. And that could be anywhere, depending on our effort, from 30 to 60 seconds. There's other variables. It could be longer, but that's a pretty good target to probably use. And if you want to be safe, let's just say 60 seconds to get up to VO2 max. That means a 4-minute interval generates 3 minutes if I can hit that power target at or near VO2 max. Now, we're still using power as a proxy if we're actually that close. And there are some ways with models like WKO and stuff like that, but we're not really sure. But we could look at that 4-minute section and say, I'm getting 3 minutes. It's a 4-minute interval, 3 minutes at VO2 max. So if I do 4 of them, that's 12 minutes at or near VO2 max. That's how you calculate, or at least project, and I shouldn't say calculate, estimate, because you still have to hit the power numbers. You have to be able to go hard. And that's a good way to estimate your end output. Again, you could use WKO5, VO2 max modeling, and some other things to try to get more precise, but that's a good target.
So,
Now,
like, if for the people now who are thinking, well, I'm doing all these hard group rides and I'm doing them several times a week, if you were to look at your power file from that, you're going to see far less time than you think, because what's happening is you might have 30 to 60 seconds super hard, but then, it's hard. And so you're going to back off and you're going to sit on a wheel or you're going to get dropped or whatever and, do it again. So I think like the perception of going hard, it's a very different kind of hard when you do this sort of format.
Couldn't agree more, right? Because I just showed everybody how to calculate in a controlled environment time at or near VO2 max. In a group ride, if you were to measure that, you would spend time over 100% VO2 max. We don't think that's possible. It is for very short times. And then under, and then over, and then
Mhm.
under. You would not spend nearly as much time at or near in a very dynamic group ride or a Zwift race as, well, maybe in a Zwift race because they tend to be monotone, but generally not. Um, but when you're programming that to understand the interval, it's easier to understand an interval. You're targeting that 14 to 15-minute range. How you get it is all about the interval design. So let's say in the 4x4, those are known as steady state intervals and they're very predictable. So once we understand how to calculate, how do we target? The original VO2 max in Andy Coggin's classic targeting zones, that's actually a pretty good number. And it tends to be true over a lot of different people's schemes for targeting. And it's a pretty good starting point of 105 to 120% of your FTP is a pretty good target. But there's some individualization there. An athlete with a high anaerobic capacity, a high neuromuscular strength might need to go a little harder than the averages. But here's the trick, right? Well executed VO2 max, water finds its own course. Like most athletes, you could say, well, your target shouldn't be 300, it should be 310, and that's cool. They're going to go out and do 310 if they can. So
Mhm.
it tends to take care of itself in the individualization in execution. So your targeting should be 105 to 120. I tend to focus on 110 to 120. But then time in zone, like how long that interval matters. And you'll see research that says you can stimulate VO2 max anywhere for 2 to 8 minutes of steady state effort. I'm going to tell you right now, 3 to 5 minutes is the sweet
Mhm.
spot of improving your VO2 max because you can control the other. Remember, fatigue is multifaceted. If I don't have the strength or the efficiency to get through the interval, it doesn't matter. I'm going to fall off the intensity target anyway. So if I keep those intervals in 3 to 5 minutes, I'm good. So when we think about the overall concept in summary, we're targeting 14 to 15 minutes at or near VO2 max, at least 90%. We need to take into account the fast component of VO2 kinetics. So it doesn't relate one-to-one. Total interval time does not relate to total time at or near VO2 max, but I gave you a little way to kind of estimate that. The intensity of the delivery needs to be 110 to 120% is my sweet spot. You could be a little lower, as you sort of fade in the end, but 105 should be the floor. And then finally, what's the rest in between? The beauty of this type of steady state VO2 max is 1-to-1 is usually a pretty good number. Rest for the same time range that you're executing. So if you're doing 4-minute intervals, your rest could be 4 minutes. Maybe as you get a little fitter, or if you want to create a higher capacity load, shorten the rest a little bit. But usually 1-to-1 works pretty darn good for these type of intervals. That's the simplest way to execute it. That's concept. One of the bigger barriers is we don't do enough work in that zone in this right timing. Namrita, thoughts, things to add?
Yeah, well, one question I would ask you is, okay, so going back to the topic, like, all right, so I do this. Let's say I have room in my schedule to do it 2 times a week. I just can't handle 3 times a week. Like, how long is it going to take before I get faster?
So that's interesting. The fitter you are and the higher the intensity training, the faster adaptation occurs. So if you look at like an average of all adaptation, most adaptation occurs in 3 to 8 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks. But that's cumulative, meaning if you've done a good foundation, you've completed good work, you have good aerobic capacity, and you're doing high quality work in this phase, your adaptation rate will come in 2 to 4 weeks. It'll come much faster if you're hitting the intensity targets and doing the work. One, because you're fit, and two, because you'll adapt a little faster to high intensity training. Your body is more responsive to this type of load, assuming you do some other things right.
Mhm.
Um, you just need to be able to do the work. This leads to a second mistake often in the peak as you're pushing towards this people will do 8 to 10 weeks of VO2 max, and that's too long. That will lead to a different type of stagnation. You should target this I want to get faster phase. Like, since the podcast is why don't I get faster? 3 to 5 weeks of this. Like, that's what you really need. That's the sweet spot. And everything you do, every time you're doing high intensity, they have to be quality work. If you're overstressed, hot, overly heated, you're fatigued, you're hungry, you need a hug, whatever it is, you need all those other things in alignment to be quality. The final question I always get, what about interval format?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen the introduction of a lot of micro interval formats, 40-20, 30-15, even 30-30, which is a little more of FTP, but still is a VO2 max improver. So these micro interval formats have a certain amount of popularity. I'll give you versus what I originally described 4x4 as a steady state format. Mm-hmm. So I'll just give an overarching concept here. Generally, science shows that the response is the same. And at a scientific level, I agree with that because there is just enough to kind of validate that that's true. But for me, nuance of doing this and my wisdom, it's not totally true. Like, he's not completely dead. Like, movie reference for everybody. What I find is micro interval workouts do well early in your VO2 max or as maintenance work when you are doing it works as maintenance work when you're doing your winter, like in doing some high intensity training in your winter. But as you progress into this, I want to get faster, move away from micro intervals. That's my opinion. Here's why. When you look at micro intervals, you'll see improvements in your average across the micro and in the stress strain relationship you're creating until you get a little more high intensity fit. But then that average will cap, and you'll notice that cap will sit at or just above your FTP as an average, and you have a hard time driving that. If you were measuring what was occurring in a lab, and I've seen this time and time again in modeling, your fractional utilization, your adaptation comes pretty quickly, but there's been a bigger gap between your VO2 max and your FTP, like the max cardiovascular capacity and how much metabolic capacity you have to get up under there. Your fractional utilization gap has gotten bigger. You can't push harder in the up down to make the watts that you need. That micro, great for starting. They're a little mentally easier and physically easier, better for beginners, better for the early phase moving in there. But at some given time, you just do the hard work. And that is 6x3, 4 or 5x4, 4x5, whatever your numbers are. But they need to be in that sweet spot. They need to be at that high intensity target. They need to be controlled 1-to-1. Those ones will drive that slightly next step above the micro interval, in my experience.
Mm-hmm. So let's say you're choosing the right ones now, and again, your goal is to get faster. So you're doing it 3 to 5 weeks of this type of consistent VO2 capacity building work. Um, how do you know if you're doing it right? Like, how do you know if you're going hard enough? That's actually pretty common question, because we need like the right stimulus to drive the response that we're looking for. You can't just put them on your calendar, go through the motions, and then expect to get faster, right?
Wow, what a great question. We're turning this into the VO2 Max show. Um, that's a tough question. So I'll give everybody, again, opinion. Lots of smart coaches in the world, lots of information out there. Everybody should read everything and come to their own. But here's how I think about it. So power is not prescriptive. I truly believe this. It's descriptive. That being said, I prescribe with power, but it's not, I don't look at the execution and be like, yes, no, pass, fail. That's not quite how it works. So let's use that. Let's use 5x3 minutes with 3 minutes rest in between as an example. Here's how I teach intervals to coaches and my own athletes and stuff like that. I call it the upside down check mark. So here's a secret coaching thing, right? Everybody get out your paper. I want the first interval they do at the lowest possible number in the target range. I never put a number out, I always give a range because I don't want them. One of the things people do so many times in these type of intervals, you blow yourself up on the first one and the whole set is crap. Don't do that. So you do the first one. That's your basis. And that lets you feel, it lets your body upregulate a little and get ready for the intervals. The next one, you go harder, and your target should be what you really think you can sustain through the rest of the workout. That's your second interval. Then your third one, you go a little harder yet. Like, let's not believe you. Like on the third one, I got a little more because you have to overreach for these. And that's hard. Then the fourth one, you even try to do a little more. Now, the fourth one, probably, because remember, we're doing 3 times 5. I honestly, when I see a good set, that's your highest power output is your fourth one, not your fifth one. If you wait to the fifth one, you're holding back too much. You're not going hard enough in 2, 3, 4. Like if the fifth one's the strongest, 2, 3, 4 were underdone. And then in the fifth one, you're fighting it to be home. You don't want that one to be lower than your first one. It's okay to have them equal. Now, if you think about visually, if you drew a line across those intervals, like if you put a little graph of them, it would look like an upside down check mark. I want to see that interval format delivered. Then I check back. That's quality, my book, my opinion. That's quality interval sets. Now I'm looking at that against, were they in the target range? Was cadence quality? What were the other variables they were performing in? If they can achieve that check mark, what were the negative variables? Was it crazy hot? Do I need to send them a message and say, hey, were you fueling? Were you eating? Were you rested? Whatever it might be. So for me, the data, the number isn't the first thing I look at. The quality of the execution. Did they hit the formatting I just said, upside down check mark? Then the data informs me about, because I don't know one workout. Don't look at a single workout as pass fail. Like that's not what they are. So did they hit the upside down check mark? Data informs me of yes, they executed well, they hit the numbers. Then I can look down in the variables. Cadence was right and heart rate looked great, or whatever it might be.
Great advice. I'm gonna summarize everything you just said. And Tim's how to get faster is you have to work harder.
Yes. We could have saved everybody a lot of podcast time.
And so I'm gonna win with my how do you get faster? And mine is not you have to work harder. Mine is you get to eat more.
I'm at a natural disadvantage. I just want to be clear. I'm going to lose this fight.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Well, as to not turn it into the VO2 Max show, I'll just go into what my piece is, and it actually does integrate with exactly what you said because you can go on, you can do 3 to 4 to 5 hard group rides a week and get away with maybe you take in a bottle and maybe you've got like a scoop of, scratch in your bottle or something, or yeah, you had a gel right before the ride and who knows how much you're even taking in. And maybe after the ride, you're going to get dinner or you're going to get a beer or whatever. So you're not really thinking about how you're feeling those workouts. And then, but you feel like you're riding hard. You're doing, 10 hours a week of riding, but you're not getting faster. And so that's one type of athlete. The other one might be, well, you're eating super clean, if you can see my quotes. You're weighing your food, you're tracking everything, and you're taking in your like 30 to 60 grams of carbs an hour, and you're doing really well with that. And um, you don't think that nutrition is the problem. Like you've got that dialed, but and you're eating your protein, but you're still not getting faster. So I'm going to say under fueling or suboptimal timing of your intake
Mhm.
that could be impacting the quality of your workouts, your durability in your workouts. It could be impacting your recovery, your glycogen availability. That could lead to underperformance or stagnation. So you're not getting faster. And it's not necessarily, I mean, potentially the reason is not like that you don't know that carbohydrates are important. It's that your gut or your brain might actually be the limiter here. And I say that for two reasons. One, your brain might be the limiter because you don't think that you need more than 60 grams of carbs an hour, or you haven't quantified it. You might be thinking that you're taking in enough, but you're also not working hard enough that, your body can actually benefit from more. So if you take a group ride or you take an endurance ride, let's say a tempo workout, and you turn it into a VO2 max workout, and then you do that twice a week or three times a week, and then you do that for 3 to 5 weeks, your current level of intake and your fueling habits is not going to support that higher workload. So you're actually going to have to sit down and have your brain tell your body that it needs to eat more, and it needs to eat more at the right time. So, 2 hours before the ride or 4 hours before the ride, and scaling up your intake during the ride. So all of a sudden that bottle that you're coming back with you only drank half of, so maybe you had 10 grams of carbs, and that's not going to cut it anymore. If you want to, finish with that upside down check mark, and then you want to do that twice a week, and then continue doing your, higher volume endurance training between that, you now need to be taking in 60 grams of carbs at a minimum per hour and pushing up to 80 to 90 to do that work and then adapt from it. Again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. You're going to see the benefits of that right away. So if you're worried about, well, that work that Tim said sounds really hard, like how am I going to do that? Well, you're going to feel the benefits in that workout. It's going to impact your intervals and how you can execute them. It's going to impact your recovery from that. So you can do it again, 2 days later, and then again 2 days later. Um, so that also, sometimes these workouts, you give the example of 4x4. Sometimes that could be a pretty short workout, and you're like, well, I don't need fuel for that because I read that I don't need carbs for anything under 90 minutes. But I go back to the brain again being a limiter. Carbohydrate has, uh, it's an evidence-based mechanism here. It's not just to support blood glucose, and it's not just to support muscle glycogen sparing or whatever, but there is a direct link from when you take in carbohydrates and you sense it in your mouth to your central nervous system. So to your brain, where it's like, oh, I feel better immediately. I always remember the example of Oscar Eukendrup giving this 25 years ago. He was like, what happens if you eat a Hershey's Kiss? Like you immediately are like, wow, that tastes good. I feel good. And that's not because your blood glucose has increased or anything like that. It's just that central nervous system effect. You've heard of mouth rinsing and, other ways to stimulate those positive feelings from carbs. So yeah, use carbs, have a gel or have, a bowl of cereal before you do a VO2 max workout. Time it well, and then fuel that ride with something. It doesn't have to be 90 grams of carbs an hour, but taking in some carbs and actually prioritizing them for these short, hard workouts can still benefit you, even if you're not, worried about draining your muscle glycogen stores. So that's why I think the brain might be the limiter from a fueling standpoint. The other side of it is, let's say you are a fairly high volume athlete. So you're training more than 8 to 10 hours a week, and you're now including these harder sessions. Maybe they're not even VO2 max sessions. Maybe they're, FTP or long tempo sessions. Maybe you're focused on durability because you're training for gravel worlds, 150-mile race or something. Potentially, you do need more than 60 grams of carbs an hour, and you feel like that's enough, or you're scared to take more because you're worried about gut issues ruining your race. Like, okay, it might be really hot at gravel worlds. There's no way I'm going to be able to take in 90 to 100 grams of carbs an hour for 9 hours or 10 hours. But what is limiting you there in your training to be able to handle that is you haven't considered that your gut also needs to be trained in the same way that the rest of your body, your muscle needs to be trained, your legs. And so including that as part of your training, like working with your coach to have fueling targets to also support that long tempo work or those long endurance sessions that end with, tempo efforts, pushing the boundaries of what you can handle now. yeah, in the same way that it's not comfortable to do 4x4 minutes of VO2 max or 5x5, it's not comfortable necessarily to go from 60 grams an hour to 90 grams of carbs an hour, but that process, is pretty essential if, again, your goal is to get faster. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's so funny, and I didn't want to say it when I was talking about VO2 max, but when I see the inability to execute the upside down check mark, the first question I asked was,
Hmm.
what were you eating before? What were you eating during? And it so directly relates. I highly encourage a uh on like we tend to have it in revert like backwards in my opinion when it comes to this fueling. I'm going out for a couple of hours endurance ride. I'm just riding endurance. Um, day. But I'm going to make sure I got some food in me and I'm going to put 4 or 5 pieces of food in my pocket and some drink mix because it's easy to eat
Hmm.
and it feels okay when you're doing
Yeah.
endurance. But then you're like, I'm going out, I only have an hour or 75 minutes and I'm going to smash out, 4 times 4. You're going out with maybe drink mix, you have no food, you haven't really and the reality is those two things are backwards. You can kind of, and you shouldn't, but on a day, if you're a little underfueled in endurance, you're going to get away with that, out to a couple of hours. The direct impact of fueling well before, not like 5 minutes before, not just 5 minutes before, an hour or two before, and
Hmm.
5 minutes before, and during drives quality interval sets. The funny part when Namrita and I were having this discussion is we're actually saying the same thing. And I
Hmm.
think if somebody's listening to these 2 points, they're connective, meaning you could do all the VO2 max work in my point, I put it out. And if you're not fueling that well before, during, after, and then eating well every day, you're still not going to get faster. Because one, those intervals won't be as good. Two, you don't have the energy and the fuel to adapt. You're sending the wrong signal to your body.
Hmm.
I think what you're
Yeah.
saying is so key.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's the concept of training is the stress, but you get stronger and you adapt to that stress. You come back stronger and you're able to, do it again better or for longer. So higher power, or for a longer time or both. And you need the energy to do that. And um, anyone can do it for one session or even two sessions or maybe for, 2 weeks. But if you find that you're not able to keep up with the desired dose frequency, required to break through that barrier that you have, like getting faster, whatever that means to you, you may lack the energy to do that. So when we think about timing, so okay, like yeah, I eat a pretty again, clean diet, I'm fueling my rides, whatever, but if the timing is off, that really can impact. I mean, you're going from riding 10 hours a week hard to riding 10 hours a week much harder in some of those sessions. And the stress is much greater on your body, and the recovery, the energy needed to adapt to that is higher. So why not optimize the timing there? So take what you're doing, if you quantified it and you're like, I feel like that's enough, like address the timing. So before, again, and you just said it, let's say 2 hours before, 3 hours before a ride, 5 minutes before, during the ride, and then that recovery piece afterwards. So people don't realize how important that is. I mean, I guess maybe they do and they kind of forgot because we've always talked about this anabolic window, but that first, 30 to 60 minutes after a hard training session, your body's going to restore glycogen pretty fast. You don't need insulin to make that happen. And so it's basically, free glycogen. There's no reason to not to withhold recovery, for a meal later. So whatever that is, maybe you prefer to eat real food in a real meal, but I would say don't sacrifice that window for the idea of like having the perfect meal later on. So if you need a recovery drink, just take the recovery drink there or a bar or whatever. Um, get something because that recovery window will help you for when you do that same or harder workout again the next time. Or even if you have, an endurance ride the next day or whatever. That recovery window is pretty important when we think of, okay, we're not just looking at each workout in isolation now, we're looking at the whole stream of the week and how the workouts connect together, how today impacts tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and then the week after and the week after. So prioritizing, carbs specifically with maybe some protein after your sessions ASAP. I mean, if that's 30 minutes, great. If it's 60 minutes, great. But I usually just tell my athletes, like, as soon as you can, focus on that.
You know, it's
Don't,
funny. Sorry, one of
no,
the
go
things
ahead.
that for me, like I explain it to my athletes this way. So I want to hear your point on this. And I've learned
Mhm.
this from you. So, like on those high intensity days, I want them to put a bigger carb fence like
Mhm.
around that workout, starting 2 to 3
Yeah.
hours before, ending an hour after. And I want them to pour carbs into that fence, like into that fenced in corral there. I want them to get balance out. If it's too many, great. Like on a 75-minute high intensity day, I am encouraging an athlete to take 75 grams of carbs, like
Mhm.
60 to 90, be there. Because as long as you're not getting crazy and it's not giving you a GI problem, and those are numbers you can easily handle. And I want you to eat 100 grams in an hour or two before. I want you to have had a solid meal before. I might even want you to start off with some fun, 20, 30 grams as you're rolling out the door. Because
Mhm.
if you're a little over there and then a good recovery drink, another handful of grams of carbs, just lean them out for the rest of the day. Like you can, if you went overboard in carbs in that corral and then had to lean a little more out yesterday to bring your day balance, to me, that's okay because the one difference is if you put a lot of the carbs in that time correctly, not too many, but you're putting
Mhm.
carbs around that, you're going to give better interval execution. You'll probably utilize more kilojoules in the effort itself, therefore consuming more overall energy, of which carbs is a big supplier.
Mhm.
Um, and you'll immediately begin adapting better. The battery isn't as drained as low. You're not in some type of traumatic, I don't mean like you're dying, but I mean traumatic, like your body really needs something really bad to respond to that stimuli. The things you need to maximize that effort are readily available because you're fueling in that little kind of fenced in corral. Thoughts
Mhm.
on that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you said two things I want to elaborate on. So one, a lot of time, so people are worried about overeating typically. Okay, so I'm doing a hard session and maybe my session's, 75 to 90 minutes, whereas I feel like, I can manage my weight better or whatever if I'm doing like a 3 to 5 hour endurance ride. Well, okay, that is a lot of calorie burn in that 3 to 5 hour endurance ride. But again, we're looking at here, why am I not getting faster? So, okay, you're doing maybe, like less overall kilojoules in that short ride, you're getting faster. Feeding your body the energy, the carbohydrate energy it needs to be able to do that high amount of work in that period of time is important for that breakthrough. Again, it's also, if you're looking at racing, so you're doing these VO2 max efforts to get faster for, a 60, like a 100K race, let's say. Um, if you haven't trained your gut to be able to handle that carbohydrate intake at that high intensity, you're going to be much more hesitant to fuel, to even eat breakfast before that race and that hard start, or have that, gel on the starting line because you're worried about feeling nauseous or sick at, the first, 30 to 60 minutes of that race. So you're already impacting your performance capacity on that day. So potentially, if you're focused on performance in that hard start, like, yeah, use these VO2 max sessions and these harder sessions, even if they're short, to maximize your carbohydrate intake tolerance. So maybe that is 90 to 100 grams of carbs an hour for a fairly short workout. But you're doing it for a specific reason. You're not doing it because you're worried about running out of muscle glycogen, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is for like overall energy intake throughout the day. Like, yes, it's important, if you're looking at weight control to maintain energy balance. Also, with adequate energy availability, you don't want to be just like overshooting your daily targets and your needs too much. But something that happens, that's not uncommon is when you're doing a hard ride, especially in the heat, sometimes your appetite is suppressed afterwards. So you might find that you're really hungry on an easy day or even a moderate day, but after you do a hard VO2 max effort, like 4 by 5, your appetite is suppressed. So now, if you're under fueling that ride before, during, and after, immediately after, and you still have a suppressed appetite later on, you're under fueling times three. Even though you might not be intentionally doing it. So you're not dieting and you're just like, I'm not hungry or I didn't think about food. And if that ever happens to me, because usually, that's not an issue. I can always be hungry, but it'll happen after a hard ride like that. It's just not the first thing you're going to think about is eating. You're just like, wow, like maybe I'm thirsty, but I'm not thinking about eating. So taking care of that potential issue by really prioritizing your pre, during, and post ride. Like you said, the carb fence, I like that term around that workout. You're now at least taking care of that session and mitigating the risk of underfueling around that session. And then later on, when your appetite comes back, maybe, you can fill in the rest of your carbs with your grains and your vegetables and your fruits and things like that.
And your pizza.
And your pizza, of course, and
That's
your nachos,
important. It's one of the food groups,
and your
so we
ice
need to
cream.
make sure.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. I mean, and the other, as you do those intensity workouts, I hate using this term because it's confusing and the science has been so morphed into sell people stuff. But you do have an epoch effect that you have this knock on, this residual effect post higher intensity exercise that does keep, your stress level is elevated. You're still kind of coming down from the upregulation from that intensity, a little better energy, actually supplying and fueling in that phase restores things even better yet. Because what happens in the world of diet, and I don't, Namrita would know this better than me. People attach that to here's how you lose weight, epoch all day long, and all that other stuff. But there isn't a knock-on effect that on those higher intensity days, ensuring you're fueling in that range, that you will keep using it for a little while longer. Don't stress it from a weight gain, just adjust later when you're outside the fences.
Hmm. Yeah. So in summary, work harder, eat more. You're welcome.
Holy shit, that's a podcast. Wow. So wait a minute. I got to work harder, but I get to eat more. I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Got it.
I mean, if you think about it, that's actually like really great advice. So, yeah, good conversation. And maybe we'll do some more of these uh, podcast formats. So I like it. Well, thanks everyone for listening. For more coaching content and information on all our coaching programs, including our expert guided one-on-one coaching, visit us at joinbasecamp.com. Our mission is to empower and educate you, the athlete, and to provide a training and learning community for the seasoned racer and newer rider alike. For more content like this, sign up for our monthly newsletter with free training, nutrition, strength, and mental performance tips at joinbasecamp.com. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.